All right, guys, so here we go. We're going to cover one of the most controversial topics in pro mountain biking, and that is, should pro riders be paid more? So let's get at it. So this subject is a little bit of a difficult one for me because one, I can see both sides of the story, and two, I am a fan of pro mountain biking racing and events. However, there are some economics at play here that need to be discussed. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's actually going on. So guys, I don't know if you noticed, if you follow pro mountain bike racing, this past weekend, the entire men's group sat out of the slope competition at Crankworx.
The male slopestyle athletes approached the Crankworx team at the official riders meeting on Wednesday, March 20th, with some demands requested to be met by Friday, March 22nd at 12 p.m.
So I'm going to put the links down in the description below of every single detail, every article, all the releases, so that you can do a deep dive into it yourself if you're really interested in seeing all the nuances. We're going to cover basically high level concepts here of what the agreement actually was and how that affects mountain biking racers as a whole and what I think is actually happening here. Now, a lot of what I say, some people might not agree with, so hit up the comments section below and let me know what you think.
We as a united group of all invited male riders have had a meeting and demand the following to be addressed by Friday, the 22nd of March. Unless addressed by Friday, we will not drop in for the contest. These demands go for all events moving forward, including Rotorua 2024. Number one, a €2,000 appearance fee to each invited male rider, alternates included. It will be a total of €32,000 for the whole field. 2. Hotel covered for all athletes, including alternates. 3. Contest to be scheduled before noon in order to avoid wind delays and maximize the chances of a full live stream. We are not looking to discuss these terms with you. We are looking for a clear and direct answer by Friday.
So what were the riders really looking for? They were looking for more compensation for the events. They were also looking for several different safety factors to be implemented for each of these events for better rider safety. And then the third one, which was actually the sticking point. So Crankworx, what did they agree to do in this negotiation? First off, they did agree to address all the safety concerns with the events throughout the entire year. They also decided to increase the payouts for these events by 37%. So it sounds like the two groups came together on a lot. What was the sticking point that actually kept it from getting done and causing the men to decide to walk out? Specifically, it was the mandatory appearance fee for every single rider that shows up to the event and the travel expenses being covered by every single rider. That means hotel, airfare, or anything else they needed to get to the event. So what is a mandatory appearance fee? A mandatory appearance fee is something that you see a lot with exhibition events, whether it be Nitro Circus, the Globetrotters, anything else where you're showing up, showing off your skills, but there's no competition involved. You're not going for any prize money or anything else. It is an event that you show up, do your thing, and leave. So you basically have a base salary for showing up to that event no matter what happened. And the riders wanted that implemented within all of the events throughout the entire year, as well as hotel and travel paid for by the event organizer. And that is what Crankworx came back and said they could not do and they could not budge on.
The third, the appearance fee of €2,000 per event is not something that Crankworx can achieve. Crankworx hosts slopestyle events that are part of a professional sports organization, and the athletes compete in it for prize money. One of the underlying concerns that was raised in some of our discussions was the cost of travel, and to address this concern, we had offered to implement a minimum prize amount of $3,000 New Zealand for this event.
First off, I'm going to use my experience of what I know from other sports on how money is actually made through these events. I know when we watch these pro mountain biking events, whether it be at Whistler or even Crankworx with Slopestyle, it looks like there are a ton of people sitting there watching the event. And while that is great for the local area when it comes to tourism, and yes, they do make some money on the event, when it comes to actually making big dollars at events, it comes from broadcasting revenue share. Whether it be an NBA game, baseball game, anything else, a vast majority of that money that these players are making through through their contracts is actually through that revenue share on broadcasting deals. It's not done from ticket sales at the event itself. That's why these baseball players are able to make hundreds of millions of dollars. It's because they have so many games spread over the entire year that they are broadcasting over and over again and selling ad revenue on. Those contracts actually make it so they get a share of that ad revenue because they're using their likeness and name and that game to actually sell that ad space. Now, when you go into mountain biking, even when they broadcast the Red Bull Rampage, you're not getting any of that revenue share because there is no revenue. Not to mention the fact there are a lot less eyes actually watching that broadcast. So there's none of that contract revenue share with the professional mountain bikers like there is in other sports. And then second of all, the travel, hotels, and accommodations are not actually handled by the organizers of the event. They are typically handled by the team and sponsors. So when they're asking these organizers of these events to cover those expenses, one, the money might not be there. I am making a huge assumption here that they are not operating on some big mountain of cash and making money like CEOs make at Fortune 500 companies. But I have to imagine when it comes to an event like this that has to do with the setup, the preparation, the breakdown, and all the expenses associated with it, they're not sitting on this gigantic pile of cash that they're just divvying out to each other at the end of the event. There's a lot that goes into it and a lot of expense, but the structure of professional sports is so that the teams and the sponsors cover those expenses for their professional athletes. One of the biggest examples of this is the FIA doesn't pay F1 drivers to show up to their events. The team and the sponsors cover those expenses. So when the riders are asking these organizers to cover those in an appearance fee, it is a little bit outside of the realm of what would normally be done in professional sports. And then you add into the fact, current market conditions in the biking market are horrible right now. And whenever you run into these situations where we have excess inventory and they're cutting budgets and they're cutting the price of bikes, guess what else gets cut? Marketing budgets and sponsorships. So we're in a position right now where these companies are looking to cut these budgets, not expand them. So when you're asking for money out of the team and the sponsorships, right now it's difficult for even some riders to secure a sponsorship for the upcoming year. So I could see why the riders want to push some of that burden onto the event organizers, but the event organizers are then coming back and saying that's not our responsibility to cover it for the riders. So I could see why this came to a head-to-head issue that neither one would compromise on. The event organizers are saying that's not our responsibility, that's the responsibility of your team and sponsors. The riders aren't able to get it out of their team and sponsors, so they're trying to put that burden back on the organization and the event organizers. So it came to a point where they could not negotiate, and that's where it fell apart, and that's why what you see happened last weekend. So what is my overall opinion on this? One, I do think they were justified in asking for more prize money. And the event organizers did come back and say they were going to increase that 37%. Now, without knowing their private financials, because they do not have to make those known, I do think there was room for that if they see attendance going up and everything else with the event itself. I do think there was room there, and I do think they should be compensating these riders that get out there and perform and create an event. They should get a little bit more share of those profits if they're there to begin with. Two, I think this is a great time to talk about rider safety at these events. We are no longer dealing with the events that we were 10, 15 years ago. These riders are really pushing the limit, and most of them are not insured. So I do think it's time to have a little bit more of a conversation on what we could do to support these riders if they get injured at these events. Now, historically, that would be different than it is at any other sport as well. But I think as a collective, they should be able to figure out something that would provide more support on that end for these guys that are getting out there and doing their thing. And then thirdly, I do think pro mountain bikers these days, in whatever discipline they're in, need to start realizing they need to be their own marketers. You are no longer really going to make a great living racing mountain bikes. A lot of these brands have figured out, instead of funneling all this money into sponsorships and events, they can go make a couple viral videos that are a lot cheaper and actually get a lot more exposure that gets shared all over the internet. So while I love the old school thinking of you get to make a living racing your mountain bike, that might not be the case anymore, unless you're in the top of the top 1%. You might be better off actually making videos and partnering with brands on making content versus actually traveling to events. And you might actually get a lot more money out of that and be able to sustain a better living, actually being more of a marketer for the brand than just a racer who just wants to race his mountain bike. And lastly, I think one of the unfortunate parts of being a pro athlete and getting to do what you love for a living is there is not very much money in it unless you are the top of the top. Every single sport out there expects you to pay your way in a lot of ways if you want to try to climb the ladder and get to the top. I mean, I would love to be a race car driver, but the reality is if you look at every single race car driver, they all have a rich dad. It's not a sport that you can get into if you don't have your own financials to put your way through until you get up to the top and you actually start making that kind of money. It is very similar across a lot of pro sports. And what pro mountain bikers need to realize is, one, the landscape has changed. Two, you are going to have to pay your way for a certain period of time to actually get to the top. And three, there are other ways that you can financially help yourself out with these brands that you might not be comfortable with at first, but will actually be more lucrative and might help you actually just race your mountain bike to begin with. So guys, I want to hear what you think down in the comments section below. Is any of what I'm saying make sense, or do you completely disagree? I want to hear both. Go ahead, hit up the comments. I'll respond to as many as I can.